From the John DeVito Broadcast Center, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another broadcast of Armchair Experts with Jim Leon and Rich Massaro on the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network and Jack O'Lantern 89.7 WRHS Norwich.
Oh, how cute.
Jack O'Lantern, yeah. Been that way for a while, though.
That's right.
On Thursday, October the 18th, the year 2018. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here they are, Mr. Rich Leon and Jim Massaro.
Oh, wow. That was, John's really...
John's ad-libbing again. I don't know. He missed us. You know, he missed us so much. We got the snickerdoodles today, cookies.
Guess what, Jim? I
thought I was rich.
This is what I was going to call John about. I told John a few minutes ago. I said I was going to call him about something. We're trying to get some information on the history of the Norwich flag. So. Something that I had in my hands indicated that it might have happened in 1974. There's other things that say it might have happened in 1990. So I go to the library, and I get all of the information on 1974, the Citizen newspaper, okay? Well, I'm going through the Citizen newspaper, and I'm in the first set, so it goes from January to March or whatever it is. And who is on the front page of the paper presenting something to the fire people here in Norwood Park Township?
You're always popular.
John DeVito, the head of the, and what's the name of the club, John?
511.
The 511 Club. And I'm like, oh, my God, DeVito was on the front page. He was front page news long before he ever met us, Jim.
Boy.
So
we bask in the glow of his reflected glory. That's all we can do.
Yep.
That's all we can do.
So, John, that's what I was going to call you about, because I had seen you in the paper. So, anyway, let's on to the show. What were you going to say something, John? Okay.
No, I have my mouth full. I thought John was going to say something. I wanted to finish my very yummy snickerdoodle.
There you go. All right. Yeah. So, Jim, what's on your mind?
I don't know. We talked. We had lunch while we were going, and
we did the whole show over lunch.
We did the whole show over lunch, and can't remember a damn thing we talked about.
We got 55 minutes of dead air time.
so, good night, everybody.
It's nice.
I thought we were recording last week, and I had a couple of things that were a little more timely.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Relating to baseball, but I'm still going to use them anyhow.
Yeah, use them. What the heck?
Because
whoever thought about us being timely on this show?
You know, I've given up. I've given up in many aspects listening to sports radio to hear what they have to say, because really the only intelligent conversation is you and me. And
I was thinking the same thing on the way over here.
Yeah,
no doubt about it.
I think it comes to us and all those 26 or 27 people that
listen to us.
That listen to us. Well, at least I know Bill Caravia always listens.
That's good. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
We appreciate it.
You know what? If I ever get lost, I'm going to have them put you on my case, because you'll find me.
Bill can find anything, although I did ask. Bill had been searching for all our classmates from the class of 69, and he's found a ton of people. I did ask him, though. I said, there's a couple of socks that I'm missing from my laundry, and if he runs across,
he'll never find those. Those stay missing.
Yeah, if he can run across them, I'd appreciate it, so I can match him with the orphans, because I'm tired of that. We still have some old things to talk about regarding baseball, and there were a couple of things that were interesting. One, Statboy sent along some stuff.
Oh, cool.
He came up from the basement at Steve's house, and went to the computer and sent some things along.
Oh, okay. What did he send?
He said some thoughts on the Cubs season.
Oh.
It was an abysmal ending to a not-so-terrible season for Les Cubs.
Mm-hmm.
They managed to win some 95 games, a figure that's almost expected with today's team. Lord knows the idea of winning that many games 20 years ago or so would be reason to pop the champagne.
You better believe it.
But there were no corks a-flying across the clubhouse this year, and one of the reasons, if not the main reason, is that the Cubs were held to no more than one run in 39 games this year. If you take the playoffs, the one game and more, or the play-in game, it was more. But a rundown of this stat in 2018 shows the teams that had the most of what we call BO, for binary offensive effort, 0 or 1 runs.
Mm-hmm.
Baltimore, 40 games.
Yeah.
The Cubs, 39.
Mm-hmm.
Miami, 37. The Giants, 36. And the Mets, 35 games. So we have 2 hang-around teams in the Mets and Giants, one team whose abbreviation refers to missing in action, MIA, and the Orioles, whose season harkened back to the days of 1939 when, as the St. Louis Browns, they finished 64.5 games out of first. This year, there was only a 61-game gap between penthouse and outhouse, where the O's were concerned. Comeback, Harlan, Clift, all is forgiven. The Cubs may feel disappointed or cheated that the season ended as quickly as they did, but they should kiss the cleats of the baseball gods that they were in the hunt as far as they were. Since 1961, 20 teams have had 39 games worth of BO. 6 of those teams had winning records. After the Cubs, the 2014 Mariners had the next best record of those teams at 87 and 75. Next are the 71 Royals at 85 and 76, and the others, the 84 Royals, the 08 Dodgers, and the 11 Dodgers weren't much better than 500.
Okay.
Since the start of the live ball era, 1920, which makes it 99 years, the Cubs had 7 years of 39 or more games with BO. 2 of those years, 1963 and 1968, were 2 years where pitchers dominated, and none of the other seasons, 1942, 1949, 2010, 2012, were banner years for the Cubs. It looks like this year's Chicago Cubs were lucky more than anything else. If I'm the GM or Joe Madden, I might want to think of what passes for a formidable offense this season and take another approach to scoring more runs.
Yeah. Well, I think when we talked about the Cubs early on, and the season, I think, had already started, and they had gone through one of these periods where they weren't scoring.
Hitting, yeah.
My comment has been, but you know what? It's probably a comment these days that could apply to a lot of teams, so maybe it's not all that important. But we have a lot of players in that lineup who strike out a lot, and I think that's part of it. But that could be said of a lot of teams in Major League Baseball today.
I've got something else on another article that I want to talk about, too. Talking about some of the numbers that were interesting in the game this year. In fact, let me go over that. Let me go over and find that one now.
Well, the Sox were record breakers, right? They broke the Brewers' record of
most in the season, I believe.
And here's an interesting thing. Now, Jim, you're talking about the Cubs and, of course, the team that beat them out, the Brewers. And look what the Brewers did to sort of rectify that situation. They brought in guys like Lorenzo Cain, Christian Yelich.
Yep.
At midseason, Mike Moustakas.
Yep.
And who else? Curtis Granderson.
Okay.
I don't know. Curtis Granderson, I would assume, puts his bat on the ball fairly regularly, even for a guy who's more known as a guy who will hit the long ball. But Moustakas, Yelich, Cain, these are all guys who hit the ball more than they strike out, and that is probably the difference in Milwaukee being where they're at and the Cubs
being where they are. Yeah. It's interesting too. Now there was another article talking about the numbers and the things that have happened this year. October 2nd on the Athletic, and I'd recommend, if you want some good writing for sports, pop for an subscription to the Athletic. It's online. There's some great writers. I got a deal for the half price for the first year.
Oh, no wonder you're pushing it.
I know. When it comes next year and I have to renew at full price, I'll think twice about it.
There you go.
You know.
You'll still renew it.
I probably will.
Yeah.
Jason Stark wrote an article on October 2nd. He said, the numbers that define baseball in 2018, revisited. Numbers. For 6 months, the great sport of baseball has been churning them and burning them every darn day. Little did it know we've been paying attention. And it especially didn't know we've been paying extra attention to 7 numbers in particular because we're sneaky about that. 6 months ago in this very space, I wrote a column about numbers, but not just the goofy numbers I have so much fun with. These were the most important numbers in baseball. What made them important is they seem to be telling us something. They seem to be shining a light on baseball in the 21st century. We called them the 10 numbers that define baseball in 2018. So for the last 6 months, we kept our eyes on those numbers, particularly the 7 you'll find below. Have they gone up, gone down, gone sideways, gone away entirely? So we thought you'd be interested. So here they come again, 7 numbers that define baseball in 2018. The magic number, 8,000. What do you think that is?
I don't know, total strikeouts in the major leagues.
You thought teams shifted a lot last year? They doubled down this year. There were nearly 8,000 more shifts this year.
Well, watching the Cubs, I could actually believe that.
You can believe. I thought the same thing when I looked at that.
Yeah.
Shifts in 2018, the raw numbers. God bless whoever looked at all this to compute this. Shifts in 2018, 34,673.
Say that again now.
34,673 shifts.
Interesting.
6-3. A 6-3 putout doesn't mean much of anything anymore.
No, it doesn't tell you what it used to tell you anyway.
2017, 26,705. 2010, 2,463.
Yeah, Jim, you know what? Let me just throw a thought in there. I was just telling somebody about this, I don't know, a week or so ago. It had to be around 1968 because that was the year of the pitcher, and
right.
the Sporting News was still the Bible of baseball. I want to say the writer was Bob Bragg, who was a regular contributor to
St. Louis.
Yeah,
he was St. Louis sports writer
to that publication. And people were trying to figure out how to put the offense back into baseball. And going along with what you're saying, and I'm pretty much a purist. So anything that's actually legal, I'm pretty good with. And I guess shifts are legal. So
Yeah.
But his contribution at that time, and I think I might have even mentioned this to you before, but he advocated, okay, instead of being able to say, and he used the outfielders more than the infielders, but he said, okay, draw circles in the outfield, and that's where the 3 outfielders have to start on every play, inside those circles. The reason being, now not only did you have strong pitching, which was shutting down the hitting, but, this would open up some holes for the offense. Actually, based on because there are a lot of things in pro football that get me aggravated rule-wise, but one of the things that's starting to get to me in baseball is these shifts. I personally would like to see it go away. I think it's detracting from the game. I don't think it's helping.
Yeah.
So, but go ahead.
The next one kind of relates to that. The magic number is 192. What it means, if you're a left-handed hitter and you pulled a ground ball between first and second base this year, that was your chance of reaching base.
Yeah, I could see that.
Not just on a hit, but by any means at all. Fielding error, throwing error, earthquake, divine intervention, anything.
Yeah.
Do shifts work? Heck yeah, they work, and no baseball species is being crushed by the shift more than that species known as the left-handed hitter, and especially the left-handed hitter who can't run.
Yeah, yeah.
Sports Info Solutions tracks a stat called the reach base rate. It's like on base percentage, except that it counts all methods of reaching base, on a hit, on an error, via any sort of defensive calamity. What that stat tells us more clearly than ever that is that if you're a left-handed hitter and you pull a ground ball, you're going to be out.
Mm-hmm.
Might as well run to first base just to make sure, but you're going to be out more than 80% of the time. Here's how that rate looks for left-handed hitters who pull a ground ball between the first baseline. This past season, they 193. 2017, 197. 2016, 193. Go back to 2011, 235.
Okay.
That, friends, is ugly, and it's getting uglier. But when I ran that figure past another AL exec whose team is one of the heaviest shifters in the game, his reaction wasn't exactly oozing for sympathy of the Chris Davises of the planet.
Yeah.
You know, he's good, he said almost merrily. It's not up to the commissioner to change some sort of rule. It's up to the players to adjust. Exactly. Hit it up the middle, hit a line drive over the second baseman's head, square a ball up. So what if all the pitchers throw 95 now, and defense is played better than it's ever been, and defensive positioning is better than it ever has been? Look at MVP candidates. Christian Yelich doesn't have a 192 on-base percentage on his ground balls. Adjust.
Mm-hmm.
The game changes. It's time for players to adjust.
That's true.
Here's another interesting number. 800. This is the story of the vanishing balls in play. So that number, 800, represents how many fewer balls were put in play this year than one season ago. But if you've mastered subtraction, you could easily compute the dramatic timeline trend here. We're now at about 6,000 fewer balls in play than a mere 4 years ago, and about 11,000 fewer than 10 years ago.
Can I jump in here, Jim, for a second? Because you just reminded me of something I was thinking about, not necessarily thinking about this show, but just thinking about in general. And you and I have talked about this, but with Chili Davis having been let go by the Cubs, I was thinking about launch angle, the term launch angle. And when we were kids and you had guys like Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays around, I think the conventional wisdom was everybody wanted to hit the ball square, which usually was a line drive or some kind of base hit. And I think I want to say when Reggie Jackson came along, this conversation was more prevalent. But a home run, in terms of the way the ball is hit, the ball is sort of mishit in a sense because you're hitting a little bit below a ball that's squared up. So if you hit it in the right spot, it goes. It's a home run. Now that a lot of these batting coaches and people in the game are teaching launch angle, I believe that going to your point of less balls in play, launch angle has a lot to do with this because launch angle, what you're telling me is as a hitter, you're trying to hit a ball that will go up in the air and get out of the park. So I'm not saying guys are uppercutting, but you're going to try to hit a little bit below what you would normally hit if you're squaring a ball up. So what happens when you mishit that? You either don't hit it at all, so it's a swing and a miss, or it could be a pop-up or an easy fly ball.
Sure.
But I think the philosophy of launch angle is contributing to what you're saying here.
Sure. And the comment that the writer is making here, it goes on. He said, he asked, this is a motion picture waiting to happen. Who kidnapped the ball in play? It isn't getting any better. Sorry. You know what we saw more of this season than ever before? Strikeouts.
Oh, that's for sure.
What else? The most strikeouts in history. 41,207.
That's a lot of strikeouts.
That comes as no surprise since it's the 13th consecutive year we could say that. But here's the ripple effect of all that swinging and missing. It's accompanied by the fewest hits in almost 50 years. 41,019, which computes to just 8.44 hits per game. And here's what that produced. More strikeouts than hits for the first time in any season ever played.
Wow.
It's interesting, and he put an interesting. He put a good chart in here. He said the decline in balls in play can sometimes seem imperceptible.
Up. Okay.
Everybody wants to call Rich today.
Yeah. Okay. We'll take care of that.
Okay. The decline in balls in play can sometimes seem almost imperceptible until you see how the numbers pile up from year to year. It's actually shocking to view them in a 10-year window. Okay, 2008, balls in play, 131,860. There's our base year. Next year, it declined by 1,624. So, and then as it accumulates over the years between 2008 and 2018, 11,123 fewer balls in play.
From which
From
years?
2008 to 2018. The cumulative numbers.
Well, it's interesting. It's like a lot of things that happen, even in life. I'm listening to the Cubs game on radio, and Pat Hughes and Ron Coomer. And I don't know who it was, but it could have been Anthony Rizzo maybe, somebody who's normally more of a power hitter that they shift on, was trying to lay down a bunt to the left side because there's nobody there. And I don't remember exactly what the comments were, but they were questioning the strategy on that. Why would he want to do that, when we need a hit or a home run? If you listen to, and I don't listen to every game, but I listen to quite a few games, and it doesn't matter if it's the South Side, if it's the White Sox announcers or the Cubs announcers, radio I'm talking about. I don't really do too much TV. It's always, we need a long one right now. Now, you know what? That means that the entire industry is brainwashed because you might hear a guy like Jack Purkow say that at the end of a game when a dramatic home run would really top off a good game. But you know what? You didn't say that in the third inning.
Or Greg Maddux in a commercial going, "Chicks dig the long ball."
Yeah. So you know what? The thinking on in this game, there's been a slow creep away from making contact, taking advantage of what the defense gives you. I mean, to me, if I was a guy like Kyle Schwarber or Anthony Rizzo, when they give you the hole, they moved the third baseman over to shortstop. Guess what? You don't even have to lay down a good bunt, and you can be on. Yeah. They could actually throw you out. But as long as they know that you're willing to do that, you got to start to make them think about doing something else.
Yeah. Which takes us to another number here, the magic number, 100.
Okay, what's that?
Remember when a 20-homer season actually made you a power hitter?
Okay.
A much feared middle-of-the-order long ball force? Okay, so much for that. There were 100 players who hit at least 20 home runs this year.
Okay.
That makes 3 straight seasons in which at least 100 hitters thumped 20 homers or more. And when was the last time we saw 3 straight seasons with at least 120 home runs, 20 homer men?
I don't know when.
Never.
Never? Okay.
Never. Not even in the steroid era. So remember when GMs used to dig the long ball? Now they take it for granted.
Yeah, you know what, though, Jim? I have to say this. I don't know, as much as they hit the long ball, I don't know how big of an effect that they have on the game. I was listening to the Sox play the Rangers, and Joey Gallo, I think he hit more than 30 home runs. I don't think he ever hit close to 200. So what? Okay, you hit. To me, here's the thing: is it nice that you hit the long ball? Let's not talk about Joey Gallo. I was thinking about Kyle Schwarber. Again, Schwarber, I think, hit 26 home runs this year. Yes, I bet you he didn't knock in 60 runs with the 26 homers. He was a much better hitter overall when he first came to the game. And I would say this. In terms of a guy like Kyle Schwarber, I'd be looking for 40 home runs from Kyle Schwarber. And part of the problem is with both the strikeouts, and I'm not going to say how could you say it? Not the long ball, but with the strikeouts, is you have so many guys just looking over every pitch instead of, what if your pitch comes early in the count? You know what? Then you got to hit your pitch.
You
right?
got to hit your pitch.
And I think that's part of the problem with the strikeouts.
Yeah.
And as much as they're hitting home runs, I think a guy like Schwarber should be hitting 10 or 12 more home runs than he's hitting. But he's not hitting them because he's too blessed selective at the plate.
Teams, in the article, it said teams can find power pretty much anywhere and everywhere.
Right.
The average team got 19 home runs this year from its shortstop.
Okay.
It got 21 home runs from its leadoff hitter.
Wow.
And this isn't an age where a bunch of guys are hitting 50, 60, or 70 home runs. Remember, 38 was enough to lead the National League.
Okay.
So with the rise of 20-homer guys, it's just literally just that. It's a proliferation of hitters with 20 to 30 homer power up and down the lineup.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, we had a guy on the south side who, if you listen to people, they say he has all the tools, but he struck out well over 200 times, and a lot of those, a lot of those were looking.
Yeah.
That's looking too much, Jim.
Yeah.
That's looking way too much.
Yeah. There was, it was interesting. Here, another one talking about the stolen bases. The average baseball game in 2018 featured a whopping one stolen base by both teams combined.
Mm-hmm.
It was the lowest stolen base rate since 1972.
Okay.
Just one team stole 130 bases. As recently as 2011, 9 teams stole that many. The year that Ricky Henderson swiped 130 by himself, there were 16 teams that stole that many.
Jim, here's what I would say about this, though, and I would say about this and also the sacrifice bunt. I think the stolen base and the sacrifice bunt still have places in baseball, but now here's where my thinking has changed. You know what? How many times do you there's been times where, let's say this, depending on who's up and what the situation is, say there's a pass ball or a wild pitch. A lot of times I'm thinking the guy has got to go to second, right? But is it an advantage because now the other team may have the option of taking the bat out of a good hitter's hands by walking him and, increasing the percentages for a double play, force out, whatever. And so my thinking on that has changed. Again, there's a place in the game for it, but is it as important as it was once thought? I'm not so sure. So
another thing that you have to look at too. We've talked about the offense in that. Here's another one. The magic number, 678. No, that's not how many times Yohan Moncada struck out. That's how many more relief pitchers came bursting through the bullpen gates this season than last season.
Oh, yeah.
And that number is up nearly 2,000 when compared to the game 5 years ago.
Yeah, I could easily believe that. And here's the thing. A few years ago, Jim, I don't want to put a number on it, but let's say it was 3, 4, could have been 5 years ago. The Yankees were that particular year had a thing where their relievers at wherever their AAA club is, Trenton, Scranton, something like that.
Something with a ton in it.
Yeah, with a ton. They were on sort of a rotation. They'd come up, they'd be there for a little bit, they'd send them down, bring up some more guys. And I'm like, well, at that point I thought, that's pretty cool. That's unique. That's a good way to maybe do the bullpen thing. But now, if you take a look at the deal section in the paper every day, which I do, this is a common thing. Guys are up and down. The Cubs had, who was it this year? Corey Mazzoni. They had the guy that Farrell. What's his? Luke Farrell.
Luke Farrell. Yeah.
They had Ricky. is it Romero, Ricky
Rosario.
Rosario, who actually ended up sticking. But I want to say they had 5 guys at least, maybe 6, that they did this with on a fairly consistent basis. And the Cubs aren't the only one who are doing it. So the premium now is on these relief guys coming in.
Right.
And
Right.
For one, it slows the game down. If they want to find a way to speed the game up, that's,
Right.
and I guess you can't reduce the number of times that you change pitchers. That's a strategy thing that you don't want to interfere with. But, I think the other thing I see is people kept saying, boy, if the Cubs make the playoffs, they're not going to go far. I think they were right, because the bullpen was pretty much blown out by the end of the year. And I even say this, when the Cubs signed Brandon Morrow to be their closer this year, I thought, you know what? In the back of my mind, I never verbalized this, but I thought, I don't think this is going to work. And I didn't have a reason why, so I never said it. Well, it ends up Brandon Morrow broke down sometime in July? Never came back.
Sure.
But I'm thinking, what was in the back of my mind is Brandon Morrow was in every God-blessed game of the playoffs last year almost with the Dodgers.
Sure.
I mean, you mean to tell me that guy wasn't overworked? Give me a break.
At that point. Hey, John, why don't we take a station break? Would you think we should do that? John agrees.
You're listening to Armchair Experts from the John DeVito Broadcast Center on Jack-O-Lantern 89.7 WRHS FM Norwich and the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network on Thursday, October the 18th, the year 2018, with Jim Leon and Rich Massaro. And this is Jack-O-Lantern 89.7 WRHS FM Norwich, Illinois. And now back to Jim Leon and Rich Massaro.
I just wanted to hear our theme song from,
Sure.
just hear some smooth jazz.
Hey, there we go.
There you go. John brings it up. Going back to what we were talking about and the fact that the bullpen really was worn out and all the things that went wrong. Years ago, when we'd go to games and watch them, the bullpen didn't come out until the starter really hit empty.
Right.
Or it was, beyond all hope. Now you find yourself settling into a seat and the relief pitcher's in the game in the first inning. You said, and in this article, it said you can thank the Tampa Bay Rays for that, but they proved that the opener, not a starter, the opener,
Okay.
wasn't merely innovation for innovation's sake. It was innovation with a purpose, and it worked. The Rays were 10 games over 500, 44-34, when they used an opener. They were only 8 games over, 46-38, when they used a regular old starter.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and they led the American League in first inning ERA, too.
Okay.
I think you're going to see a lot more of this, said one AL executive. A lot more, and I wouldn't be surprised if half the teams in baseball do it next year. Not every day, but in 1 or 2 spots in the rotation. This, however, isn't the only reaction to watch for. It wouldn't shock anybody if MLB proposed some sort of limit on mid-inning pitching changes this winter, a change that would help move games along and force teams to prioritize more versatile relievers instead of stocking up on those side-wheeling situational relievers who now show up as early as the 5th inning.
Boy, do they ever.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, I actually, as much as I hate what's going on, I would be against MLB coming in and telling them, that this is what you can and can't do with your pitchers. I would prefer that the thing blow up in their face or somebody's face and they take a different approach to it. And eventually, it seems to me that it's going to be a game of attrition here because they're worried about overusing their starters. Well, that isn't happening anymore. They're overusing their bullpen.
Exactly. I mean, here's a point here, another magic number.
Okay.
953. For the first time in baseball history, there weren't even 1,000 games in which starting pitchers were permitted by the proper authorities to work their way through a lineup at least 3 times.
Oh, that seems to have become the norm.
You think 953 is still a lot? Not really. It means the average team does it slightly more than once a week. It was once more like 5 days a week. I had a conversation with Max Scherzer recently about the future of his favorite position on a baseball team, the starting pitcher. He's worried. He should be. Never in the history of baseball has starting pitching been leaned upon less than they are now. There is powerful data that tells us all we need to know about why that is and why it makes sense. But it's true, and it shows up in trends like this. As recently as 2 years ago, according to BaseballReference.com, there were 1,405 games in which starters were allowed to go through the opposing order at least 3 times. In the last 2 seasons, just in the last 2 seasons, that number has dropped more than 32%.
Wow.
As recently as 2011, there were 173 complete games pitched in the big leagues. By 2016, that had been cut in half to 83, and this year it was cut in half again, 42.
I'm surprised it was that many.
I'm surprised, too. There was no pitcher in the entire sport who threw more than 2 complete games in this year. In 2011, big game James Shields, threw 11 by himself.
Well,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Is that the end of the article?
That was the last one. I love I love this. He said, that data is driving the game in a direction Earl Weaver and Whitey Herzog never would have imagined.
Well, Earl Weaver, though, would be able to imagine a lot of long ball, a lot of home runs, and very few stolen bases.
He'd be out there preaching launch angle, and he'd adapt himself to that.
Whitey Herzog, I remember his book, White Rat, talked about, even back then, which I bet you that book is out in the 80s or 90s, he talked about the reasons why starting pitchers, in this case, couldn't go as long as they once did, because this conversation was happening even, 30 years ago.
30 years ago, yeah.
But, his point was it's not that they throw too much, they just don't throw enough. That's his opinion. And I could remember when Fergie Jenkins was pitching for the Cubs, and he would throw a lot of complete games. They had a 4-man rotation, so he would pitch that would make him pitching every 5th day, I guess. And in between starts, of course, they would throw the theory would be to loosen up and get ready for their next start. So they would do a throwing session in, about halfway in between their last start and their next start. So I don't know. Maybe Whitey Herzog has something there.
Maybe so. Yeah. I think in some instances, and I haven't read the book in years, it makes me want to go back and read Moneyball.
Okay.
Just because a lot of this dependency, you go back farther. You go back to anything by Bill James when he started writing his stuff in the 70s and 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Moneyball kind of brought it more into the front.
Right.
More to the front. And look at some of the stuff and how teams are built because of that.
Well, the question that I would have on this is the way I always understood it is that your starters were your best pitchers. They were the guy who rose to the top.
Right.
They were the cream of your pitching staff. And the other guys had different roles. Mainly back then, you probably had long reliever in case the starter couldn't go that long. You had your, I guess you would say, your closer. I don't know if they called it that as much back then, but, the guy who closed out the game for you. And then you'd have your mop-up guys who were really guys who, in a real dire situation, were just there to eat up some innings. And that was about it. And your closer
would sometimes go 2 or 3 innings.
That's true. The other thing is most of those guys were, just to say it outright, were failed starters.
Right.
They were guys who just couldn't cut it as starters.
One of the greatest relief pitchers ever was Dennis Eckersley.
Now
Couldn't make it as a starter after a certain point.
Well, he
had some good years as a starter, though.
Well, there's another interesting thing you're bringing up, though. Guys who slotted into those roles. Eckersley is a great example. Hoyt Wilhelm was a starter.
Hoyt Wilhelm, right?
Lindy McDaniel started out as a starter.
Sure.
And they've, if you want to use the word, evolved into the roles they were in. But the point would be is what I don't think anything has changed in the sense that your starters, in my mind, would still be your best pitchers. I'm not saying that a closer doesn't have an outstanding talent to close, but when you start bringing guys in for one inning, for the 6th, 7th, or 8th,
sometimes not even one inning, those guys are your lesser pitchers because they're guys who can't go even 5 innings, okay? So the hierarchy, I guess, is still the same, but the philosophy in using these guys is a little bit different. Yeah. So it's interesting, and I'm curious as to the direction the game is going to go.
Well,
and I think next season we'll all see what else happens.
Well, I think it's going to have to get. I'll tell you what, the Sox have done an interesting thing. They picked Nick Madrigal as their top draft pick,
right?
And they have said they really like the idea that in his initial season in pro ball, which is just a cup of coffee and a couple different stops in the low minors, he hit for a good average, a real good average, and hit no home runs, but they're totally good with this because I think they're starting to see, okay, you look at Moncada, who's really got good talent, but strikes out a ton. You look at Tim Anderson, who had, the scribes will tout, boy, he had quite a few home runs for a shortstop, and he stole some bases, yet he hit 240-something. Which is not outstanding,
and doesn't know how to take a walk.
Doesn't know how to take
a walk. And again, neither does Javi Baez. But right. Javi Baez hit 285 and a ton of home runs.
Yeah, and drove in over 100 runs. Right. But so I guess maybe this thing may bounce back and start to go the other way. I mean, and that's a small sample. One guy. But I'm hoping that we're going to see. The major leagues go back to guys a premium on putting the bat on the ball.
Yeah. They're concerned about people the younger ones turning away from the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if you're turning away from the game because they'll watch it and say, well, big deal. They either strike out or hit a home run.
Yeah.
There's no strategy.
Yeah.
To it.
Yeah. That you're going to lose people from all generations if you take the strategy out of it.
Yeah.
Because part of the beauty of baseball is thinking along with the manager during the game.
Yeah, I always thought that too. I said the one thing about baseball is it was a very cerebral game.
Right. That definitely is.
Yeah.
I think the other games are cerebral in their own way as well, but I think baseball is, in a sense, a little bit easier to know. Or football, there's so many moving parts. I don't think people know. Basketball strategy baffles me, and hockey, I don't know the strategy of hockey. And there is strategy.
There is strategy, but I sometimes I can't follow it.
Yeah, you'd have to. You know what? I think really the bottom line is you would have had to had to have played the game a little bit more than we ever had a chance to get what the strategy would be.
And I think the issue of strategy in basketball now, to a certain extent, strategy has been taken away because, one, nobody plays defense, and two, they bring the ball down and shoot up from 3-point range.
That's true.
Yeah. At least I look at it enough, and that's what I see.
Well, and I think it all goes to people I would say are so used to being instantly entertained that I think a lot of these sports have grabbed onto these different strategies you're seeing to try to fulfill, to try to fill that niche, if you want to put it that way.
Could be. Let's talk a little football.
Oh, yeah.
I went back to another thing. It's part 2 of Stat Boy's recent missive.
You got into football too, huh?
Yes, and this goes back to the Buccaneers-Bears game. He said young Mitch ended up with 6 touchdown passes and a QB rating of 154.6. So old Stat Boy here started thinking how that stacked up with other great Chicago QB performances. We'll focus on the game since 1960. Here's a rundown of the great QB games of Chicago Bear quarterbacks. Number 10, Jay Cutler, October 1st, 2012. The Bears beat the Cowboys 34-18. Cutler was 18 of 24, 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, a rating of 140.1. Number 9, Jim Harbaugh, 9/27/92. Bears beat the Falcons 41-31. Harbaugh had 18 of 24, 280 yards, 2 touchdowns, rating of 141. Josh McCown in 2013 when the Bears beat the Cowboys 45-28. He was 27 of 36, 348 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 141.9 rating. Let's see, what else do we have on some of these games? Cutler had one in 2010 with 146.2 versus the Eagles when they won. Jim McMahon in 1984 when the Bears beat the Buccaneers 44-9. He was 12 of 18, 219 yards with 3 touchdowns and 147.9 rating. The only game on the list that a quarterback had a good, that's on this list and didn't win a game. In 1964, Rudy the Rifle, Rudy Bukic. Bears lost to the Colts 40-24, but he was 10 of 15 for 185 yards and 3 touchdowns. The best game ever by a Bear quarterback. Vince Evans in 1980 when the Bears beat the Packers 61-7, and he had a rating of 158.3.
When I hear this, it just makes me think of the stats tell you something, but at the same time they tell you nothing.
Right.
Because I know that we talked at lunch, that Trubisky's quarterback rating was higher in the Bucs game than it was in the Dolphins game. But I think when you look at what he did, or let's put the makeup of both games, you could almost say what he did against the Dolphins was a little bit more impressive than what he did against the Bucs. He was hitting in the Bucs game against the bad defense, wide open receivers, which he should be able to do, or any quarterback should be able to do. In the Dolphins game, Bears put 0 points on the board in the first half, yet he found a way to help the team bounce back and put up some important scores. And you know what? He threw one bad interception, and I think, though, people will criticize him for that. That's overlooking a couple fumbles that happened in the game that could have, and one bad penalty that really could have negated that interception altogether. So I think his quarterback rating was less in the Dolphins game, but I think you could almost make an argument he actually played better.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sometimes that a number like that can be a very misleading stat, just like we've talked about in the past about baseball RBIs.
Yeah,
not necessarily being a meaningful stat.
Yeah,
when you look at it. A couple of other things. The 5 worst performances. Rex Grossman in 2006, and they actually won this game.
I think I know which game you're going to say.
Vikings, 23-13.
Okay.
Grossman was 6 of 19 for 34 yards, and he threw 3 interceptions.
Oh, wow.
Here's a name from the past. In 1960, when the Bears lost to the Browns 42-0, Zeke Bratkowski. 5 of 16 for 27 yards and 5 interceptions.
Wow.
Rating of 1.
Oh, geez.
And there are 3 games of 0.
Oh.
Kent Nix in October of 71 when the Rams beat the Bears 17-3. Vince Evans in 1981 when the Lions beat the Bears 23-7. and the big bomber from Kansas, Bobby Douglas.
Oh,
In 1971 when the Lions beat the Bears 29-3, and he was 6 of 26 for 68 yards and 4 interceptions.
oh, wow. Okay.
And it's interesting because there's these 3 games at 0, and Football Reference has this ranked as the worst of all 3 0 games.
Oh, Douglas's?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Maybe the 4 interceptions.
4 interceptions, but...
Nick's more yards. Nick's game, he threw for 60 yards, but had 3 interceptions. And Vince Evans only threw for 21 yards, but had 2 interceptions.
I was thinking, as you said this, I did completion percentage, though. Douglas threw 26 passes and only completed 6, so that might have contributed to that being the worst. Yeah. So...
But anyhow, that was some interesting things. I always love it when Statboy throws a little missive out to us.
Boy, he must, you know what, I can just picture his basement with all the bubbling test tubes and stuff. And he's...
The computer over in the corner.
Yeah.
And the old baseball reference books up on the shelf.
Man, I'm telling you.
Because when he can't find something quickly online, he'll find it in the book.
I give him credit because some of that stuff I had never heard of, and it's really good. It's good stuff.
It is, and I think there is a group that Steve belongs to that he uses to help Statboy.
Okay.
Where he goes out to a database and pulls something out.
Okay.
Out of it. Of course, Steve isn't doing this. This is Statboy.
Statboy's doing it, right?
This is Statboy that does all this. It's interesting looking at the Bears. Now, New England's coming up this weekend. And New England's coming up, and they're coming in. Well, the game went on the board at 3. And as of... I had this out here before. Talk amongst yourselves while I look for this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Today, 3.5.
3.5, yeah.
And
who did the New England beat? Who last week was the Chiefs, right?
The Chiefs in a wild one, 43-40.
Well, I'd say this, thinking strictly old school type of thing, which probably doesn't mean anything today, but you have to think that the Bears are probably a little ticked off that they lost the game, a close game to the Dolphins, and human nature being what it is, maybe the Patriots are breathing a sigh of relief, escaping Kansas City, and you know what? Maybe the Bears could be up a little bit, and the Pats down a little bit. You never know.
Yeah.
Of course, that's old school thinking.
Oh well, you're.
You
got to get into the modern era.
Just to look at all the stats.
You have to study the stats and look at the trends.
Yeah.
And study the injury report, which Belichick will lie about no matter what.
I would.
I would too.
To be honest with you, the Patriots, other than Brady, who cares, or Gronkowski, who cares who's hurt and who's not? Those are the only two who count anyway.
I like their running back this year, their rookie.
Oh, Sonny Michael or whatever.
Yeah, I kind of like him.
Yeah, I haven't really seen him. So where did he come from?
Can't remember.
Okay,
can't remember.
Well, I remember for some reason I was home, and it was prior to last season, and they were talking about Garoppolo was still with the team, and they were talking about what
for the year.
They were talking about what they were going to do with him, and they got into a whole discussion about the Patriots, and I got a kick out of the analyst who I thought hit it right on the head. They said, well, what are they going to do with running back? And he said, he'll take somebody off the scrap heap, and they'll work out just fine.
Yeah.
And that's usually what they do. So
it's usually the way it winds up with. We don't have time with for this, but there's another writer on on The Athletic who calls himself Faux Pelini, F-A-U-X.
Oh, Faux Pelini. Okay.
Pelini, who talked about watching a football game. He received an email by accident on Sunday night. If you know this Mikkel person, please forward it to him. I'll just start at the beginning here. My time in America, dear Mikkel, my time in America has been fascinating. Television is a large part of life here, so I've been watching lots of it, mostly news and game shows and people yelling at the government. I'm writing to tell you about something I saw tonight. It was a televised American football game, and I've never seen anything like it. One team was from a university called Penn State, the other from Ohio State, and the game was played by students of these schools. I'm not certain how the universities select which students will play in a football game, but the Penn State students who were not selected stayed and watched in the audience. Perhaps they were too fat or had been drinking beer. I watched the show with my neighbor named Larry. He attended Penn State University and said I could watch the game with him if I promised not to ask questions or compare it to soccer. Two men were in charge of the show, one named Chris Fowler and the other named Kurt Herbstreit. They described the game as it happened and wore suits. At the beginning of the show, the Penn State students were led onto the field by an aggressive bald man who looked like he might rob a bank. He was also their coach. The coach of Ohio State students was introduced to us on the sidelines by a man named Tom Rinaldi. The coach was a pleasant-looking man in a shiny red jacket. He said hopeful words while Tom Rinaldi nodded. Larry does not like the Ohio State coach at all. He said he's a liar and covered up some bad things and asked what kind of things, and I asked what kind of things, and he said bad criminal things. I asked Larry if any Penn State coaches ever lied about things, and he asked me if I wanted some pretzels.
Okay.
It's a good it's a good article. It's a funny article all the way through, and when he got to the describing commercials or anything else, he said talking about Notre Dame and Stanford, and he got very Larry got very upset about that.
Oh, okay.
So
well.
Mikkel, perhaps you will visit me and we will go together. I will ask Larry about tickets, but not for 2 or 3 days. Your friend, Stan.
Stan. Okay.
Stan.
Well.
Well, we're getting into hockey season. We're getting into basketball season. The Bears could go any which way. I don't know what direction they could go in.
I think no matter what their record ends up to be, and I think it could be decent.
I think it could be, too.
I think they've put a pretty, you know what, I think they've gathered a good group of players. I think they have some talent on the team, and I wouldn't be surprised at whatever way the season went. I think a lot of, so far they've stayed relatively healthy, and I think that is going to have to be the norm if they're going to do anything towards making the playoffs. The other thing, though, I think people have a tendency, probably not just in Chicago, but every place, to overrate the other teams. And I think in the case of the Central Division, I think people have done that quite a bit with the Packers and the Vikings. I don't know that they're as good as people say that they are.
The Packers, Rodgers
is always
always dangerous, but 35 years old and apparently now with a bad knee.
Right.
The Vikings, really good ball club. Not as sure as if they're as good as they think they are. You've got Cook, who's been in and out of the lineup with his leg problems, but you have Latavius Murray, who had a really good game the other day.
Sure. Yeah.
And Cousins, I love Cousins, Kirk Cousins, but I'm for what they're paying him, I'm going, wow.
Yeah.
I don't know. He made a bad team look good all the years in Washington.
Yeah. No, is he still the highest paid quarterback, or did Rodgers get more than him?
I can't remember if Rodgers got more than him, but when I saw the contract that he signed, and it was all guaranteed. I went, holy cow.
I'll tell you, if I was Rodgers, I would have demanded that I get a better contract.
Even if it's $1.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of contracts, I just happened to glance down at this. Are you a fight fan?
Boxing, yeah.
Yeah.
Why? What happened?
Canelo Alvarez's next 11 fights will be available to watch on, what do they call this? DAZN. Some new service. A streaming service. If the rumored figures are to be believed, Alvarez just signed the biggest contract in the history of sports. While the official figures haven't been released just yet, outlets are reporting his deal is worth $365 million.
Holy mackerel. What weight division is he?
I don't even know anymore.
It's interesting.
HBO is, I guess, I didn't realize this. HBO has announced it will stop broadcasting boxing before the end of the year.
Wow.
I didn't even know about that.
I still prefer boxing to Ultimate Fighting. I think Ultimate Fighting is terrible for the most part.
I've told you my comment about Bert Sugar, what Bert Sugar called it.
But actually, it's funny you bring up boxing because we had a fairly lengthy conversation over coffee this morning about Rocky Marciano.
Oh, boy.
Somehow that came up, and it was a good conversation. And Jim Kelly says, well, Primo Carnera came up, and he says, oh, he lost to Jack Dempsey. I go, he never fought Jack Dempsey. He goes, oh, I said Primo Carnera did not fight Jack Dempsey.
No.
He lost to, I think he might have fought both Joe Louis and Marciano, and I would assume he lost to both of them.
I'm almost certain he fought Joe Louis. I don't know if he was around when Marciano came around.
It's interesting. Everything, and
now that I've shut off the thing, I can't go look it up.
I looked at Carnera's record. Everybody will say Primo Carnera was a creation of the mob and he was not a good fighter. Yeah. Primo Carnera had 100 fights, won 80 some of them. Fought guys like, for sure he fought Joe Louis. He fought Max Baer. He fought Kingfish Levinsky, Ernie Schaff, Paulino Azkudin. He fought all kinds of guys who were contenders in his time. And I'm not sure that he was actually the, put it this way, the guy that was just built up and had no ability at all. It seems to me that he was a pretty darn good boxer. 100 bouts, Jim, that's a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The only guy I could think of that I right off the top of my head who had over 100 bouts was Willie Pep.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But at any rate, that was the boxing.
Well, that was an interesting. Just happened to get that article and see that. I found a book over the weekend, and you folks are going to have to tolerate some of the things that I'm going to pull out of this over here. And I think some from a chapter entitled "The Most Uninspirational Pep Talks by Coaches."
Oh, okay.
Certainly for the Bears this weekend. We hope that they do not follow the quote of college football coach John Potsklin, who once told his team, I want 100 minutes of 60% football.
There you go. That's what we like.
Or college basketball coach Hugh Durham. It's not how good you can play when you play good. It's how good you play when you play bad. And we can play as bad as anyone in the country.
That sounds like... Richard J. Daley when he said the police are not here to
the police are not here to create disorder. They're here to preserve disorder. That's right.
Yeah.
And speaking of disorder, we've created enough disorder for another session of here. So why don't we head for the doors and let John go upstairs and take a nap?
Yep.
Yeah. No? Oh, okay. All right. All right, we had a good one. Talked a lot of baseball. Thanks to Stat Boy for all his stuff and a couple of other things. I think it was an interesting conversation. Maybe next time we'll talk more football.
Yeah. Let's do
for
it.
a change.
Yeah, well, so the Bears will be quite a way along in their season. By
Yeah, and
next
then
time.
we can either decide if we're worth anything or not. I think they're going to be interesting.
Yeah, they will.
No matter what. All right, we're going to get out of here. Thanks for listening to us. We'll do this again in about another month. We'll do this right before Thanksgiving, probably. Maybe we can have our turkeys for the sports year. Until then, we are Taillights.
You have been listening to Armchair Experts from the John DeVito Broadcast Center on Thursday, October the 18th, the year 2018, on Jack-O-Lantern 89.7 WRHS FM Nords and the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network with Jim Leanne and Rich Massaro. This broadcast was directed by John DeVito, and our special thanks to radio station manager Kevin Zeflik of WRHS FM Nords and the executive producer of Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network, Mr. John Chikanda. This broadcast was pre-recorded on Wednesday, October the 17th, the year 2018. Until next time, friends, please be safe and thanks for listening. And this is Jack-O-Lantern 89.7 WRHS FM, Norwich, Illinois.